Hello, everyone, and welcome to our exciting webinar, Improve Surveillance and Control Room Responsiveness. I'm Maureen Brunel, and we are thrilled to have you join today to explore the latest in industry-leading control room technology. We're honored to have a lineup of distinguished guest speakers, the first being Dave Michaels, who's a lead analyst at Talking Points. He will provide insightful analysis on the current trends and the future directions in control room technology. Then we will have Simon Adnot, the VP of Sales at Enghouse Interactive, and Vinay Patel, Senior Software Engineer at Enghouse Interactive. We're excited to have you guys, dive into all this presentation. So without further ado, let's get started, and I'll hand it over to Simon.
Thanks very much, Maureen. So just a quick rundown of the agenda we're going to follow for today. Thanks for joining us. We've got Dave, who's going to just provide a bit of background around some of the trends that are being seen around communications and collaboration more generally. I'm going to then talk about the control room, both from the perspective of some of the issues we see in the control room and what's important there, and how our critical infrastructure communicator or KIC client addresses those. And then Vinay next to me here is going to just provide a bit more insight into the solution itself and how it can help meet your requirements in your specific control room environment rather than on a more generalized basis. And then I'm just going to give a quick wrap up of what we've covered at the end. So I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Dave.
Great, thank you. Let me share some slides here. I think we got it. Okay. I don't get to do webinars on this topic very often. This is exciting. I'm really happy to hear about this this content here, because this is something that is very neglected in our industry. So let me tell you why I say that. So let me jump into first a brief introduction of myself. I was introduced as the lead analyst at Talking Points. I live and breathe enterprise communications. It's pretty much all I talk about, and I talk about it a lot. I talk about it in the media, nojitter.com. I talk about it on my blog, Talking Points. I talk about it in a number of video and audio podcasts, real-time recorded, and Talking Points chats. I'm talking about it on social media, particularly LinkedIn these days. And I also publish a monthly report called the Insider Report. It's kind of aimed at the industry itself, but what's going on in the industry. And then just personally, I lived in Colorado until recently for 33 years in Boulder, Colorado. Recently left Colorado. I'm now kind of mostly sitting between New York and Lisbon, which is of course a big ocean, but believe me, I'm over it a lot. So that is me, and let's get into the topic here. So I wanted to talk briefly about, here we go, the two big trends that unless you that you couldn't miss, unless you had your head in the sand, is two big trends over the past decade have been the move to the cloud, and what people don't realize is how dumb phones got during that transition. And there's more to that story here, and I'm going to kind of double click on this, but this is the bottom line: is we've moved to the cloud and a lot of implementations, which isn't great for everybody. It's certainly bad for the cruise line industry, but we've moved to the cloud. But it's not just, when we first started doing that talk, it was all about a deployment option. It was just a way of deploying phone systems, but it turned out to be something much bigger than that. And a few things got lost, which is what I want to focus on in here. So there's one thing that's happened is a lot of brands are gone. I've listed here virtually a graveyard of once mighty strong brands of enterprise communications. And there still are a number of brands in premises-based communications. We should highlight companies like Cisco, Avaya, Mitel. There's still quite a few there. But what's happened here is that market has shifted dramatically. And because that market has shifted dramatically, there's not as much specialization as there used to be in that market. And so it used to be that everybody had a particular premises-based solution for any type of situation, and that's just not the case anymore. Right now, they're just kind of more or less mainstream phones that can be deployed on-prem. And when I say on-prem, it's kind of a not completely accurate. A lot of people do private cloud. There's other ways of doing it besides just on cloud, on-prem. It's not just an appliance model. But the point is, it's not the as a service model. And I also want to be clear that the on-prem model is still a huge market and is still a viable market. I'm not suggesting that it's dead or dying. In fact, a lot of my peers keep on talking about the death of this, but it's not. It's actually becoming quite clear. We're going to have the UCaaS model and we're going to have the prem model, and it's beginning to slow down. The shift is beginning to slow down. Migration is slowing down. So what I want to talk about here is actually, like I said, I was going to double click on that. There's actually been a lot of revolutions in the industry in the past, what did I say here? I think 20 years or so, 30 years, about 30 years. If you go back further, you can start off with analog to digital, and some people still remember those days. That kind of happened in the 80s. And then right around the early 2000s, we started the migration from the digital to IP migration. And so that was a pretty big migration, pretty big change. But right behind it, I mean, this is all within the last 20 years, which is, this is 4 significant transformations. Hardware, we went hardware to software. We went phones to soft phones. We went software to services, which is the as a service model. And then what most people have missed is we've gone personalized. And this personalized thing is really causing a wrench in things. This is the problem. We're seeing this now, particularly with AI. I mean, everybody really wants to personalize everything. We want to personalize how we talk to our customers. We want to personalize how we target our advertising, whatever. But there's limits to where personalization should take place. And communications is an area where there's benefits to personalization and there's definitely disadvantages depending on the situation. The next transformation that is just starting, and so I just put it here as the 5th one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess the 6th one is the soft phone to smartphone. We're just seeing this now with a few vendors. So this one's kind of coming, future tense, but we're going to see a lot of people migrate their UCaaS phones onto their smartphones. We're seeing that now from Cisco and from Microsoft and a few other companies like RingCentral are doing that as well. But still very early days. But the main point that I want to make here is that with each one of these transformations, each one of these revolutions, the desk phone has gotten simpler and intelligence has moved to the app. And that's really the key of what I want to talk about here. You may recall the concept of a trophy phone. Trophy phone was a very large, powerful, and expensive phone that executives would have on their desk as a way of showing how important and how valuable they were, because the enterprise doesn't buy expensive phones for just every employee. They buy standard phones for every employee. So the trophy phone, much like a trophy home, was a big status symbol at one point. That with phones and with these transformations I was talking about have kind of gone away. And I want to talk about what's gone away with that. Because the desk phone appliance, something that we all took for granted, it was actually a pretty versatile machine, besides the fact that it was always on, besides the fact that it was always available, which is not true of pretty much any of its replacements. It could do a lot of things. It could make and receive calls. That seems pretty obvious, but it could make and receive calls, and it won't be just so obvious in just a moment. It could do conferencing. It could do voicemails and callbacks. And all of these features, by the way, were from a touch of a button. They didn't require logins. They didn't require permissions. They didn't require training. They were all pretty much right there. Like consider voicemail, for example. The phone had a light on it. You can push a button. It would call the voicemail and play back voicemail. Anybody can figure this out. Today, it's a much more complicated to get your voicemails. I mean, we get them in our email, but that means I need to have access to the email. It means I need to have an email app, etc. The other thing about these old desk phones was they were very shareable. And that's another important thing in certain environments. And we lost that. They were very resilient, highly reliable. They had a number of very special functions. The function I always highlight, because it's probably one of the more common ones, is call park. But most people today don't know how to park a call or even know what the concept even means, because phones don't do that today anymore. It's not an advertised feature. It's an important feature. They also had, and this particular picture doesn't show it, detailed displays. They were proprietary phones and they could do proprietary things. Today's standard phones don't really have a lot of standards around the display functionality. So the displays tend to be kind of boring. They have the time, they have, whether you're on a call or not, but we lost a lot of that capability. In fact, call park, I just mentioned, if you park a call, it has to display a parking number usually. In modern phones, they tells you that. It tells you in the earpiece where the number where you parked the call. On the old phones, it displayed it, but you really can't do that today very easily on a standards-based phone. So, and this takes me to a movie. Now, this is the movie, the first Sex and the City movie. This captures almost this whole presentation. Now, if you saw the movie or not, it doesn't really matter, but this movie, it's important to note that this movie came out in 2008. That was a year after the iPhone was introduced. And in this particular scene, Carrie finds out that the groom isn't at the church for the wedding. And so she says, quick, give me a phone. I need a phone. And somebody hands her an iPhone. And she looks at it. Now, again, the iPhone is brand new at this point. I'm surprised they worked it into a movie this quickly, but brand new. And she looks at it, and she's stressed. It's an urgent situation. She's feeling emergency pressure, and she says, "I don't know how to work this. Give me another phone." And then somebody hands her the phone that she's holding in this picture, a traditional flip phone, and this captures everything. What did the iPhone do? Now, most people think of the iPhone as a very successful product, and of course it is, and it changed everything, and of course it did. But it really changed the way we look at communications. The phone she's holding here was a simple, anybody can use it. In fact, I have reservations handing my smartphone over to somebody to make a call, because once I've unlocked it, they can do anything with it. I just had to do this yesterday on a flight. The barcode scanner was behind the counter, so I had to hand my phone with the barcode. I hate handing my phone over to a stranger because it's got all my personal information in there, and I hate to hand that over to people. We don't want to share our modern communications devices because they're so much a part of us. Where the old phone on the desk was, as I said, very shareable. And if you think about it, the context of this particular topic that we're meeting about today, control rooms are all about shared devices. It's multiple shifts and multiple people. And we've kind of lost that in the communications industry, which is why Enghouse has created the solution, which is very clever. So the dilemma today is, as I said, most people are very happy about the changes in communications. They're very happy about the smartphones. They're very happy about the soft phones. They're very happy about the ultra personalization. But we've lost some very important things. What about critical infrastructure needs, where you absolutely need shared devices, you absolutely need advanced features, absolutely has to be intuitive because of the pressures that some of these people are under, has to be ruggedized. And so we go back to, well, wait a minute, Dave, you mentioned there's a whole bunch of premises-based solutions, and there absolutely are, and they're great, but it's a smaller market than it used to be, and the specialization isn't as great as it used to offer. So the modern desk phone that we tend to use today, if you even have a desk phone, the modern desk phone, or even the app equivalent, is basically got two features. It's got an on hook and off hook, or I should say it has a hook that can go on hook or off hook. And a lot of people don't even know that expression anymore. And it has a dial pad, so you can dial phone numbers. And all those specialized buttons are gone. And so how do you answer this dilemma? And that's what we're going to hear from Simon about. So I will be on the call, and to be sure Simon's being honest, but I think we're going to take some Q&A at the end, so I hope to hear from you a little bit later in the presentation. With that, I think we go back to Simon.
Thanks, Dave. Right, so following on from Dave's section, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the kit client itself and talk through some of the things around the control room and how we address those. I guess as an introduction to that, a bit of an introduction to Enghouse. So Vinny and I, we work in a division of Enghouse called Enghouse Interactive, and we're part of Enghouse Systems, but Enghouse Systems has a few other divisions as well. So they have a networks division that focus very much around carrier grade and service provider solutions, looking at things like subscriber management and billing. We have the Enghouse Video division, and they specialize in real-time video collaborations and also distribution of video content. And they have big specialities around defense, finance, also healthcare, where a number of our solutions are embedded with other healthcare devices as well. And transportation, where we'll look at planning and logistics around public transportation, but other things like advertising and payment processing around transport networks as well. I think one of the things I would say is that in some respects, the control room solution, blends a number of the elements from across those different divisions. Within Enghouse Interactive in particular, we have a very comprehensive portfolio of solutions. So we cover everything from consulting services and audio branding, where organizations want to really lead with their brand, and that includes everything from the type of voice that people hear when they phone into the organization to the sorts of messaging that are put out, and we can help with that, down to your typical omni-channel customer interaction management and contact center solutions, things like self-service, but then the automation and use of AI to assist with the management of those interactions and the demands that they can generate. And then also using things like AI to analyze the conversations and interactions that organizations are having with their customers as well. So again, we can kind of pull on that pool of technologies that we have to build a solution such as the one we have done for the control room environment. And the thing we couple that with is choice. And this even applies in the control room environment as well, but we have the flexibility to deploy in a number of different modalities. So more traditionally, as Dave mentioned, a lot of these solutions would be what you would class as more traditional on-premise solutions. And certainly in the control room space, that's quite often because there's an air gap between the communications in the control room and the rest of the world, and even the rest of the organization itself. But more and more, we're sort of seeing a move to maybe a hybrid environment where some of the elements are on-premise and some of those are in a cloud environment. That may be a multi-tenant cloud, but more typically it would be a virtual private cloud where it's a kind of a dedicated cloud instance for that organization. But certainly we're seeing more and more leveraging of cloud infrastructure and cloud technology to either provide the complete delivery of the service or augment the services that are available on premise for reasons of high availability, survivability, and scale. So in terms of the critical infrastructure communicator, or KIC client as we call it itself, it was really targeted at the control room environment and in particular, but I don't think exclusively, critical national infrastructure. And in that environment, I think one of the highest priorities, if not the highest priority, to be honest, is the health and safety of people that are working on the infrastructure network. Because within the control room, there may be a responsibility for ensuring the supply of energy and the management of the transmission and distribution. But out in the field, you've got engineering teams that are working, maybe in high voltage power lines. They may be doing remedial work if there have been storms and infrastructure's been damaged, or they may be doing maintenance work, or it might be high pressure gas environments as well, where if there's a mistake made, it can literally be a matter of life and death. And so one of the things we did when we started building out this solution was we very much had the requirements of the controllers themselves at heart, and that really sort of forms the core of this solution. So what we created was very much something that was designed for controllers, but it was designed in conjunction with the controllers themselves. And so we worked very closely with them to understand their feedback and their working environment and build an interface that would provide them what they needed, both in terms of clear visibility, but also ease of access to the kind of core functions that they need to do on a day-to-day basis from a communication perspective. So if you look at these photos of a few different control room environments, we've just circled in orange where our application is sitting in these environments. I think one of the key things we also understood was in these control room environments, you've typically got a lot of screens and different devices, keyboards and mice that are already being utilized for some of the network operations systems and network management systems that are in use. And because we're a communications application, we're not necessarily going to be used every minute of every day, but we're important at the point we need to be accessed or contact needs to be made. And so in some cases, the solution will be mounted on a swing arm so it can be pushed out of the way. It might be on a mobile trolley so it can be slid out the way when it's not needed. The application itself was designed specifically for use on touchscreen devices, and these are typically hardened devices as well. So the sorts of devices that are quite commonly used in point of sale solutions as well. So they're designed for heavy repeated use in sort of more challenging environments from that perspective. And so they're perfect for the control room environment where things need to be ruggedized to the point where they can be used day in, day out, 24 hours a day, without sort of breaking down or failing or need a lot of maintenance. So we designed the application to fit on these touchscreen devices. One of the reasons being, as I mentioned before, so that there isn't a need for a separate keyboard and mouse. It's something that's self-contained on the screen and can just be pushed out of the way when not necessary. And that really sort of saves on desk space in what can be quite a busy and crowded environment as it is. In terms of the kit client itself, I mentioned it's touchscreen. It also has a high degree of resilience built in, so it has automatic failover in the event that a primary instance isn't available. It operates on a sort of active, or it could be active basis. So the infrastructure that supports this can be available in multiple geographies, so that as well as having a base level of resilience, you've got geo-redundancy and geo-resilience built into the solution as well. The other thing is, from a design perspective, it's one single application where all the functions can be managed. It does support single sign-on, so login can be using an existing authentication method, or the application itself has its own authentication. And the reason that's important is coming back to what Dave mentioned about shared devices. From a kit perspective, we sort of virtualize the control room. So whilst the control room might be broken down into teams and specific desks that have functional roles, at the drop of a hat, somebody can log on to a specific device and change the function of that device or that desk. And so we have the flexibility through the fact that we virtualized it of reconfiguring the control room very easily if necessary, and that can make it a lot easier to react to events that may happen. that require, additional resources to be available in a particular team, for example, for, a certain event, like maybe a sort of large weather event or something like that, or a particular spike on the network that needs addressing. You can sort of have an all hands on deck approach when necessary. I think the other thing about the application is that we've designed it so that it's very clear to see what type of incoming and outgoing communications is going on within the control room, and for controllers to have visibility of what other teams and individuals within the control room are doing, and whether they're available. We've also made it a lot easier for people to collaborate. So a lot of the time we see that it's not necessarily a one-to-one conversation that's taking place. There's quite often multiple parties on calls, conferences, and they can be both ad hoc and scheduled. And I'll talk a little bit in a while how we do that as well. We have the ability to handle scheduled callbacks as well. So if somebody calls in, but they don't necessarily get answered immediately, and it might not be something that's urgent, but they need to speak to the controller, they can request a callback, or they can leave a message so the controller can listen to that message and then call the individual back just at the touch of the button. We have a comprehensive contact directory within the solution as well. And we also have the ability for the controllers to listen back to conversations. So as part of the solution, we can provide call recording from a compliance perspective. But we can also provide what we call convenience access to the recordings. And this is where a controller can listen back to their own recordings. One of the things we see as well is quite often in control rooms, some of the conversations can be quite lengthy, they can be quite involved. A number of topics can be discussed, particularly if they're planning calls. And it can be really useful from a planning and a safety perspective for controllers to be able to go back and re-listen to parts of conversations just to kind of clarify or reinforce their understanding of what was discussed. So just kind of coming onto the user interface, this is the kind of latest Kik client, and we're just showing how the screen is broken down into different areas. So over on the left hand side, we've got the interactions and the calls that are relevant for me as a controller logged into my particular position. And I can see at the top that I'm logged in as a generic user one, and my availability is green, which means I'm not currently engaged on a call. But I can see that there is a call ringing in my queue, and that's highlighted by the green call object there. There's also a section to the right of that called other zone calls. And this is configurable, but what that can do is that can show calls from other teams. So there might be other teams or groups within the control room that I'm not necessarily assigned to as my primary function, but I do have a skill set that allows me to kind of manage that function as well. And if they're particularly overloaded and I'm not at the moment, it might be that I can help out by dipping in and taking some of those interactions for them. And then over on the sort of right-hand side of the middle part of the screen, we can also see the other zones or groups or teams within the control room and what their availability is, down to the individual users and desks that are logged into that as well. So we can see there that actually, as user one, I'm logged into zone 1 and zone 2, and I'm showing as available in both those zones. The other thing about zone 1 is I can see that there is one call queuing for zone 1. There are no calls queuing for zone 2, because that's showing a 0 underneath. And that call that's queuing in zone 1 is the one that's showing in my personal queue. So queues can be shared across controllers as they log into a particular group, or they can be specific to an individual controller if you want more of a one-to-one relationship. And then down on the right-hand side, I've got my navigation where I can switch between the different screens within the Kik client. And right down at the bottom there, I've got my controls, my call controls, and they will light up as and when I'm in different states. So for example, if I answered a call, then the hold, mute, transfer functions or conference functions would become available at the bottom there. At the moment, because I'm not on a call, I can dial. So I could make an outbound call, or I could go into the contact directory, find the contact and call them, for example. If we have a look at how the user interface has evolved over the years, I'm just showing you some of the early versions of the Kit client that were used by customers and what they look like. And really, the interface has evolved very much as the technology itself has evolved, but also screen technology. As higher resolution devices have become available, it's allowed us to provide more information within the real estate that's available on the display as well. So as touchscreen devices have improved, we've been able to improve the level of information that we display on screens. So over the years, we've very much refined the interface. And some of this, as I say, has been as the technology evolves. And some of this has been based on the feedback that we could get directly from customers as they use this as well. So one of the things we've seen is different control rooms and different teams within control rooms prefer different layouts, and therefore we've got a few different views of how information is displayed. But in this interface view here, you can see that there's a number of different users logged in across a whole range of different zones and different groups in the control room, and I've got visibility of all that activity from within the one screen, as well as the calls that are coming in that are relevant to me as an individual as well. I think touching on some of the things Dave mentioned as well, we've got quite advanced functions in terms of what we can do from a phone perspective. So we can do things like we can park calls. So if I'm taking a call and I see another important call in the queue that I want to answer, I could put the current call I've got on hold, and I could take that other call, and I could have multiple calls set on hold, and I can hop between those. So it may be that I'm speaking to two different people and I want to hop between those two, and then eventually I might want to conference them in together. I also have the ability to pass calls over to other teams or other individuals within the control room. And all these sorts of things can be done really easily at just the tap of a couple of buttons on the screen. One of the other things I mentioned is we wanted to make it very clear for controllers to see what's going on within the control room operation. So we've made it really easy to see their own status. So in the top left-hand part of the screen, we show the operator view, which is giving them a view of what's going on their desk position. So the top one here, I can see Erica Simpson's available. Then I can see Erica Simpson's busy. One of the things you can do is you can set yourself to unavailable or busy. That might not necessarily mean you're on a call at the moment. That might mean you're busy doing some particular work and you're unavailable to speak. And then at the bottom, I can see that Erica's on a call. But from Erica's position, she would then be able to see other controllers in the control rooms. For example, in sector 1, the user 2 that's logged in there, I can see what it looks like when they're available, they're busy, or they're on a call as well. The other thing is we make it really clear what type of calls are coming in. So for example, the green one that I showed on the previous screenshot is just a regular call coming into the control room. We represent callbacks with a different color and symbol. The same with different priority calls or radio calls that might be coming in. Same with voicemails, so that the controllers can identify those. And direct calls, so maybe where somebody's directly calling in to me as a controller or operator at my desk position, me as an individual, or it might be somebody else within my team or within the control room is calling directly to me rather than calling into one of the queues or functions or groups within the control room. So I can very easily see the difference between those type of calls, and they can be prioritized accordingly as well. So you don't necessarily present calls in the order that they arrive. We prioritize those within the system based on the type of call and the rules that you set, and that will dictate the order that they appear in that call queue view on the left as well. And the reason that's important is if there's an emergency call or a very high priority call, but emergency would be the sort of best example of this that comes in, that will actually jump straight to the top of the queue. It will play a different alerting noise typically, and you can configure what sounds you want, but typically that would display a different alerting noise than all the other calls that arrive into the control room. And that would be available across all the screens until one of the operators handles that call, because at the end of the day, coming back to the point around health and safety, that's sort of priority number one, and we want to make sure that any emergencies obviously get the due attention and they get dealt with as quickly as possible. So going back to the user interface again, here we're showing a situation where user 2's logged into this desk position, has one call in queue, and they're actually on a call as well. And you'll see that call with Vinay is an active call that I'm on. And so therefore down the bottom, my call controls have become available now. I can send tones down the line if I need to, which is sometimes relevant if you're calling into a different site and there's an IVR system that you need to activate and you need to press buttons, and you've got the ability to do that, and there's a sort of pop-up dial pad that appears on the screen. But I can conference those calls, I can transfer them, I can put them on hold, I can put them on what's called long hold, where I can take other calls at the same time. So I've got very easy call controls just at the touch of a button there. I can see the call history, and the call history allows me to see previous calls that I've received, and I can also listen to those as well, as I mentioned. And I've got controls down the bottom there that allow me to play back, rewind, fast forward, or scroll through the call so that I can listen back to my calls. And this is configurable, but typically we find, controllers find it useful to have access to 24, 48 hours worth of calls so that they can go back and listen to those. But it's possible to search those as well. And again, we very clearly identify whether it was an inbound call, an outbound call, who it was to, whether it was something that was direct or whether it was into a specific team or not. I also mentioned there's a comprehensive directory, and certainly within Kik, you can search that directory very easily. You can have a pop-up keyboard where you can just do an open sort of character search by typing in a word or phrase. But you can also use filters. So you can click on, for example, here the role is distribution has been selected, but I could click on that and get a pick list of different roles to choose from, and that will start filtering down the directory results. And when I find across an individual contact within there, even for an individual contact, I might have multiple contact numbers. So that could be as easy as somebody's landline or their mobile or cell phone, or for a particular site, there might be an emergency number, there might be a main number, a reception, there might be a control room number, there might be different numbers for different functions within that site as well. We also have the ability to schedule conferences. So I mentioned around these. Within scheduled conferences, I can do ad hoc conferencing, but with scheduled conferences, I can pick who I want to be on a conference, or what time I want that to take place, and the system will dial out to the people that need to be on that conference. And the reason that's useful is if you've got engineering teams that are out on site that need to be part of a call, as well as others that are more office-based, rather than them having to try and dial into a call when they're out on site, the system will go and call them, announce the fact that the conference call is taking place, and at the press of a button, they can get added into that. So it's more of a sort of a go and fetch people routine rather than relying on people to call in as well, which can be really useful for the controllers rather than them having to manually call out and try and drag people in. The directory has an easy web management interface so that you can manually manage contacts within the directory. But we do also have the option to integrate or import information from other directory or contact sources that you might have in the organization as well. So really, again, about ease of management and categorization of that information. And coming back to sort of ease and management, there's a very intuitive web admin interface for the Kik as well. So you can very easily add new desks, new users, new roles, new groups, and you can manage those from within here, and configuration changes can be rolled out really easily across the system. So it means, if you do want to make changes to the control room, there's a nice easy interface for you seeing the configuration and managing that as well. And that can be from everything down to the structure in terms of roles and groups, even down to, as I mentioned before, changing the way sounds and notifications work within the application as well. We can also now offer Kik as a service. So I sort of talked before about the different modalities, but we can provide Kik both as an on-premise or hybrid solution, but purely as a service from the cloud as well. And you get all the benefits of the ease of scalability and resilience of a cloud service, but also the security that's associated with that as well. So we have a lot of security accreditations around the cloud solution because we're very cognizant of the fact that the type of environments this service goes into, it's absolutely critical, and that's both from an availability point of view, but also from a security point of view as well. Just some recent enhancements that we've built in. As you've seen, we've constantly been improving the user interface, but in terms of new functionality, we recently added the ability to manually set different busy statuses. So it's not just driven about my status of whether I'm on a call or an interaction or not. This ability to do scheduled conferences. We also now have training and portability modes, which are two new sort of answering modes. Training mode is so that you can do a virtual seat ride. So if you're training, you could have somebody sat next to you who would typically sort of maybe plug in to a headset into where you're sat and do a sort of seat ride with a controller that's being trained. Well, now you can do that virtually. So you can be sat somewhere completely different in the control room, or even virtually in another office, and listen in and take part in calls. So you can sort of do a virtual seat ride. And then portability mode, where there might be a requirement to step away from your desk but still be involved in a phone call. We're very aware of the fact that there are long shifts in the control room. Sometimes there's a need to just go and stretch your legs or go and get a cup of tea or coffee, but you might still need to answer calls or be available, or you might be partaking in a call at that point in time. And with portability mode, we have the ability to support Wi-Fi devices so that you can get up and wander away from your desk while still having the ability to answer and handle calls from that device. So I'm just going to hand over to Vinay now, who's just going to kind of give a quick talk around some of the specifics of how the application addresses the use case of the control room and how kind of people use and configure that.
Thanks, Simon. So as part of the evolution that we've had of the Kick application, the one focus that we've tried to implement here is to how quickly we can actually change the way the screen looks. This actually allows us to deploy on a customer site fairly easily, because typically control rooms are very geographically focused. So the way we've designed the system actually fits into that paradigm pretty well. So when we go to a particular customer, the first thing we try and do is understand how that organization works. And we do that through doing a live demo with the customers to give them a look and feel of what the application looks like. But we also do workshops as part of the onboarding of the customer. So the first part of the project we'll do is sit with the customer, understand how they operate their business, and then based on that information, we can then start configuring the application. So one of the key areas that we try and leverage the flexibility of the application is how quickly we can actually sit with the customer, go through the configuration setups, and actually give them a running application based on their business. Not only that, the benefits that we have within the application is that it's a modular design and it's a template-driven design, which allows us to actually change the front UI, because a lot of the core data at the back end is very common. It's common across all the control rooms. So it all comes down to how we present that information. So with the interface, we can easily do that. But we can also interact with third-party applications that the customer has. So in the instance that we're working with a current customer right now, they've actually got an inbuilt directory, which essentially keeps a tab of all the engineers. So for example, the control room would want to get hold of a particular engineer in a particular area, but that area is quite a big area and they can have like a handful of engineers. But this directory will actually tell the controller that, okay, this person's on holiday, or contact this person between these hours. So when they search that entry into the directory, we can actually take a feed from this external directory and present that information through to the Kick application. So, we do have created this application, so it's pretty malleable in how we can mold it within the organization. To that extent, the call history as well, we can tailor that information with the IVR, so we can get the engineers to select some entries from the IVR and have that presented onto the UI. So it makes it a pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? I forgot.
It's pretty flexible, isn't it? I mean, I think sort of coming on from Vinay's point, one of the things we've seen is not just between one control room and another, but actually within the different functions in a control room, there's sometimes a need to present the information or the view of the teams in a different way. And one of the things we've been able to do is make that something that's very easy to configure rather than something that needs to be sort of hand cranked and created each time. And so coming back to what Vinay was saying about the requirements capture, that's a really great opportunity to kind of understand how the different teams work and explain, how that sort of capability can be catered for within the application just through configuration. So just sort of wrapping up very quickly, because I know we want to have a bit of time at the end for Q&A for anyone that's asked any questions. I think the key points are really that, we've spent quite a bit of time with different controllers trying to understand their needs, and what we can do is sort of help from the point of view that we have a very tailored application, but one that's quite standard in the way that it gets deployed and the way it operates, and it's the configuration of that application that addresses the functional needs of different groups within a control room and different control rooms. And so I think we can really help sort of address some of the use cases that you may have that, current solutions you might have may have dictated the way you structure things because you're driven by the environment or the technology that you've got. Again, choice, as I mentioned before, the different ways we can deploy, whether that be cloud, on-premise, or a hybrid of the two. It's inherently very resilient by design, so we don't have single points of failure, and that includes, geo-redundancy, as I mentioned, because one of the things that's very common is for there to be different physical locations for the same control room anyway, for obvious reasons of resilience and availability. And as I mentioned, with the different deployment modalities, we've got the necessary security accreditations as well, because we understand how important these environments are. We do have some resources available for you online, so please do visit our website and download the brochure that we've got that goes into a bit more detail around the Kit client itself, and feel free to reach out to us and contact us for more information as well, and we'll be happy to help. At which point I guess I'll hand over to Maureen for any questions that might have come in.
Great, thanks, Simon. And Dave, Simon, Vinay, great engaging content. We're excited to see what questions we have in the Q&A. Just a reminder to our participants, this session will be recorded, and we will be sending an email so you can download those brochures and watch the presentation again on demand. Now is your chance. If you haven't already submitted a question, please go to that questions pane and submit a question now, and we'll address it live here on the air. So let's get started with a couple of questions that I've already submitted. The first one looks like for Dave. So Dave, from your perspective, what do you see as the most significant of the changes happening with communications, collaboration, and the need for oversight and responsiveness?
Well, that's an interesting question. The main point that I wanted to make is that there is a force, best word I can think of, a force to personalize communications. There's a force to personalize everything right now, but particularly communications. And that's a force that you have to resist in a shared environment. And so Microsoft was demonstrating a new feature where they have the thing where you're talking on your phone and you promise to send somebody something, and they call it task extraction, and it pulls out the task and sends you a reminder, hey, you promised to send somebody. It's an incredible feature if you think about it. Hey, maybe that will be nice in the control room. It's like, well, it doesn't work that way, because they pull out these tasks that belong to a particular person, they send it to that person via a particular email account or something like that, and so you just have to constantly fight this force in a shared environment, particularly an environment that's got something like what we're talking about here, always on call alert environment, to resist that pressure to personalize. So fight it.
Great. Then next question we have is for Vinay. So Vinay, you're up. How easy or difficult is it to change the configuration, to add new resources, or change the channel priorities or queues?
It's a great question. We've actually evolved the application so that it is actually fully configurable, because one of the things is that, for small changes, we don't want customers to come to us. And, the more self-sufficient the customer becomes, the better it is for us, because then we can obviously concentrate on the bigger picture. So in terms of like adding new queues, for example, the customer could have multiple zones, and they want to split those zones up so that they can actually have additional resources manning that workforce. Through our configurations, we can very easily split that configuration up, and we can also do that from the UI, right from the call coming in through to the UI. So there is quite an iterative process that the customer will go through to separate that out, but it's all configurable.
Yeah, and I think on that as well, we've spent a lot of time kind of understanding, what are the most common changes in terms of whether it's sort of team structures or new services that need to be introduced, or just things that get renamed because there's a restructuring of the control room, and tried to make it as easy as possible to do those sort of things, rather than it requiring any sort of more sweeping changes, so that they become sort of configuration items, but also a granularity of the permissions around who can do what as well. I mean, one of the things you can do through the client is, if an operator or controller has the permissions, they have the ability to assign or unassign themselves from different roles or different groups that they might be supporting or part of. So again, where you've got an environment that might be quite dynamic in terms of what's going on, a supervisor could very easily say, hey, could you jump in and support in this team, and the controller can just go and do that from within the app. I mean, the supervisor absolutely has the ability to do that from a management or an oversight perspective, but typically, controllers know what they're doing, and they have the ability to make those sort of autonomous decisions if the necessary permissions have been granted in the app as well. So we just wanted to make it as easy as possible to do those sorts of things.
Perfect. And there's kind of a follow-up question. Are there any limits on groups, users, locations when implementing Kick in a control room environment?
No, not particularly. Obviously, the physical real estate of the application, yeah, there'll probably be a limitation in that regard. But in terms of functional creativity, no, there is no restrictions in that regard.
And it's quite interesting because we can sort of have one-to-one relationships where you might have a particular function and an individual that's assigned to that, but one-to-many as well, where you might have more of a team working in either one or many different roles, and so it's more of a pool of people that are supporting a function. So yeah, we've seen both, and as Vinay says, I guess you can keep adding and slicing into smaller and smaller groups, but practically in terms of that overview or sitemap view where you can see everything that's going on, there's just a limit to how much you can practically display and consume at a glance anyway. So there's probably more practical limits than there are technical ones from that point of view.
Got it. And then there's another question about implementation. So what does implementing Kick in a control room involve technically, operationally, and workflow wise?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So I think, as Vinay mentioned when he was sort of doing his piece, operationally, we spend quite a bit of time trying to understand how the control room operates today. But I think it's also using the opportunity to sort of understand aspirationally what might be helpful or useful in the control room. Because as I mentioned before, sometimes the way a control room is structured or the way it operates is bound by the technology it's using and what the limitations are there. And I think one of the big things is we offer an opportunity to, because it's virtualized, is to make that more flexible and more dynamic, and that can sometimes be quite a big change operationally because there are other things that go around that sort of thing. So I think there's quite a lot of time spent, both from our perspective, understanding the customer's environment, but then also trying to provide educational around what's possible. And then technically, yeah, I mean, it comes down to, where is the application going to be located? How's it going to be accessed? Are there any infrastructure restrictions? Because quite typically this has to be deployed into a hardened environment. So we go through a process there. And I think one of the biggest things is just testing before anything gets rolled out as well. And also spending lots of time, with training environments so that the controllers have access to the application, they get comfortable with it. But I think, change is always a bit scary when you're going from one particular way of working to a new one. I think because it was something that was designed in conjunction with controllers, it was always the intention that, having never seen this application or used it before, it should be actually quite easy to pick it up and start using it and understand how it works. It's quite intuitive from that point of view. The buttons have icons and labels to say what they do, and at the touch of a button you can access pretty much all the functions you need to straight away.
Great. It looks like we're almost out of time. Let me check to see if there's any other questions. No. Simon, Vinay, Dave, anything you want to close with before we close out? Any additional comments?
I don't think so, particularly from my perspective. No, I think we've covered most things.
All right, perfect.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. That's always good to end in that. Yeah, there we go. So thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to hello@enghouse.com, and then we'll be sending the playback link shortly. You'll be able to rewatch this, download any resources, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your time. Bye.